Good evening, everyone, and welcome to BT's Fly Tying Friday. Tonight, 6 December 2024, Barry Webster is going to tell us about flies near and far. What does that mean? He'll be telling you. And our weekly tip started out to be a two for one. Two for one what? Well, you'll have to wait to find out. But as it's turned out, a special person has shown up tonight, so it's going to be a three for one. But enough of that. I'm Al Beatty from Boise, Idaho. My lovely wife Gretchen is at a family function tonight, so has not been able to join us. And I'm particularly pleased to introduce a speedy fly tire. That's what a buddy of his by the name of Jack mentioned to me just a little bit ago. And that fellow's name is Barry Webster. And Barry is from Farmers Branch, Texas. So that's a Dallas suburb where he lives with his wife, Teresa. He has two grown daughters and a college-age granddaughter who is his best fly tying and fishing buddy, along with his golden retriever, Wally. He retired from IBM Corporation after a career in technical sales management. Barry holds a BS and an MS in mechanical engineering from Texas Tech University. He's a licensed professional engineer in Texas. Previous to IBM, Barry worked for a consulting engineering firm in Houston, Lockwood, Andrews, and Newnham, I'm sorry. Barry has been active in the fly fishing area by serving on the boards of the Fort Worth Fly Fishers. He's the tying director, and on the board of the Dallas Fly Fishers. He's an active member in both clubs. He has also served on the board of directors for the Texas Council of FFI. Barry has just finished serving on the board of directors for Fly Fishers International, where he chaired the membership committee and served on the executive committee. He is currently on the Fly Tying Board of Governors, where is one of the whip finish editors, the chair of the 2024 Rendezvous, and the Buzz Busick Library Committee. Barry has been an active demonstration fly tyer at several FFI expos, the Sawbug Rendezvous in Mountain Home, Arkansas, the TRWD Fly Fest, and the Texas Fly and Brew. Barry is also a member of the Roadkill Roundtable, a group in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that has been tying together since the early 70s. It's my pleasure to turn the microphone over to Barry Webster.
Thanks, Al. I appreciate that. So Al mentioned the near and far piece of this. The near is one of the flies that I'll be tying for you is a fly creation of an Umpqua signature tyer, Chris Johnson. Chris owns the Living Waters Fly Shop down in Round Rock, Texas, which is just north of Austin. And it's by far and away the best fly shop in Texas and holds its own against any fly shop I've ever seen. Chris is one of Whiting's largest distributors and always has an amazing selection of fly tying materials. Chris is a really interesting young man, family man, good Christian man, and started a fly shop about, I think, almost 20 years ago now, and has been very, very successful with his fly shop and with a guiding service. And Chris is very active. I believe he's the current president of the Guadalupe Trout Unlimited Trout chapter, which is the largest TU chapter in the U.S., and has been very active in conservation efforts with native cutthroats. So Chris has a large range of flies that he has created and are now Umpqua designated flies, and you'll find them, most of them are called Mimic something. So I'll be tying the Mimic hopper. The far part of the conversation comes from the other fly that I'll be tying tonight, and it's a Barry Ord Clark. So we're going to go across the pond to pick up that one. So Al, if you wouldn't mind sharing the recipe for the Mimic hopper. Okay, and there we go. All right, so you can see Chris ties this on a TMC 5212, which is it's a hopper and terrestrial fly hook. And Chris ties it in size 6 to 14. I think you could actually go up in size. I'll be tying it tonight on a 6 just to help everybody with seeing it. But I particularly like it in the smaller sizes, and I'll show you one tied on a 14, and it's a really, really cute grasshopper pattern. Chris traditionally ties this with yellow deer hair. But as you can see in the screen that I have up right now, I tie it in orange. I tie it in kind of a chartreuse color. And really what I'm trying to do is we get grasshoppers in orange and bright green and yellow are kind of our primary hopper colors. And so I would encourage you to figure out what your local species of grasshopper is and tie that with corresponding deer hair and CDC to match up with that. A couple of comments on things. Chris ties this typically with the Uniflex, and that's what I'll be doing. I like the way the Uniflex works, but if you don't happen to have Uniflex, you could tie this with any standard silicone or rubber legs. It would work just fine, and I've tied it many times, and those I particularly like it with the centipede type patterns where it's got the barred leg. I think that's a very effective leg pattern. So here is the mimic hopper, and this is, I think this is probably a size 6, and you can see that that's tied with orange deer hair. We're going to go ahead and let me show you what that looks like in a size 14. There's that same pattern tied in a size 14. And it's really effective on our little panfish down here, the bluegills and great-eared sunfish and things like that. They see these small hoppers like that, and they just absolutely cannot resist it. I'm going to tie this with a TMC 5212, and I'm tying it with a size 6 tonight. First thing I always do is smash the barbs. Put that in there. And I don't know if anybody can tell, this is a Dynaking Barracuda, and it's got a new set of the jaws in it that the company in Colorado is now producing that bought out the Dynaking line. And they are super strong and super heavy duty. So if your Dynaking jaws are worn out, I highly encourage you to go check on those, because it's a great addition to the vise. And I typically tie this with like a 120 or a 240 denier thread. Just going to do this in a dark brown because it makes a nice segmentation on the deer hair. Get a little thread base started in there at the back of the fly, and I'm going to cut me a clump, and I'm going to go ahead and tie this in yellow like Chris calls out. So I've got a clump of yellow deer hair, and we'll do some clean up on the side over here to try to get all the fuzzies cleaned out of that. And then I'll do a hair stack. All right, now I've got a nicely stacked set of deer hair. I'm going to go ahead and cut off those tips because I'm going to be using just the body of the deer hair on this. I'll go ahead and do a loose wrap on that, capture it, and I'm just going to attach all this down. You want to either get all of this bound down very well, or stick your scissors in there and clean all those off, because if you leave them sticking out like that, they'll actually show through the body. when you move to the next step. Okay, so I've got that cinched down really good. I'm going to advance my thread up here to about 3/4 the way up the hook. And I'm going to use my fingers to preen all that down and really pull it forward nicely, because I want all of this deer hair that's going into the body to be parallel. I don't want it twisted or moved around at all. And then I'm going to really crank that down. All those tag ends. Turn that over so I can clean it up a little bit. And if you got any loose fibers that are sticking out of there, you can just trim them off and get rid of them. Okay, and I'll bind the front of that down real good. All right, now I'm going to take this thread and I'm going to create a segmented body back towards the back of the fly. Oops. And I'm going to carefully cross that over. So I'm creating X segments on there. Okay. At this point, I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to grab some yellow CDC. On both of these flies, I'm going to be doing a technique that is CDC in a split loop. And I really like this technique because I think it adds a level of bugginess to the body that just is outstanding. So I'm searching through my bag of, and I like both the Fulling Mill CDC, and I also like the Trout Hunter. They're both really, really good quality CDC. And I'm just picking a couple of them that are nice and full. And I'm going to show you a series of tools on this. I'm going to be using a hairline feather prepper. And this works very, very nice for capturing CDC and putting it into a split loop. So I'm going to grab my CDC feathers, stroke them back, and I got 3 of them down here that I'm going to add in. Do 2 or 3, whatever, kind of the mood hits you. But I've got those captured in my fingers, and I'm going to grab. Okay, so I've grabbed those CDC feathers and I just pulled them down into the slots on that feather prepper. That's going to allow me to take, I've got a Swiss CDC clamp, and you can use a number of tools. Hairline makes a material clip. You could use one of those. There's a number of people that out there, the Pettigene clips would work just fine. You could use a bulldog clip if you know what one of those are. But what you want to do is just grab the feathers. You grab the barbs that are sticking up out of that feather prepper. And if you'll notice, it has the rachis up here above, and all the barbs are bent down facing into the clip. And I'm just going to take my scissors and simply insert them in there just inside the rachis and cut all that off. And I'm left with a really, really nice clump of CDC that I'm going to insert into a split loop. Now, another tool, and if you can't tell, I may have a tool problem. There are multiple ways to split the thread. You could flatten the thread out with a bodkin, stick a bodkin right in the middle of the thread and split it that way. That works very well. They make several different tools for that, but oops, sorry about that. This is a Schmayen thread splitter. Get that in there so you can see it. And it is the best tool that I found for this. There are several out there on the market, but this one works as slick as anything that I've seen. Let me turn that down so you can get just a little bit more view of. So you just take this thing and pull it and then stick it forward into the loop and it splits the loop. I can split Viva 16-aught, 14-aught with this just as easy. This is obviously a heavier thread. I think this is a 240 denier. And so it splits pretty easily with anything. But with this Schmayen thread splitter, I can split almost any thread that's out there. So I'm going to take my Swiss CDC clamp, put it inside the loop, very carefully align those threads to where I want to grab them, grab that. And then what I do is I take a whip finish tool and stick it in there. And this is just so that my bobbin is not hanging down and hitting on the bottom of the table. And I hold that and spin the bobbin, and you can see that's tightening up, and you're going to spin this a lot. Think of it 50 or 70 turns to get this fully bound up the way I want it bound up. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And I'm just going to come in here and lay this CDC in. Whoops, I'm forgetting one step. Before I do that, I am going to grab a feather for the wing. And there are lots of different feathers you can use. This is a Whiting Herbert Minor hackle. I like it because it's got really nice delineated markings on the feather. And I'm just going to one of those out of there. And I'm going to take that feather and I'm going to strip off all the fuzzies. And this is one place I do this a little bit different than what Chris does. Chris ties this in pretty short. When Chris ties this in, ties them back basically at the back of the body. I like them a little longer than that. I think this is one of those, personal aesthetics. And one of the things that Chris does when he's got a big feather like this, he will take it and take his scissors and trim it so that instead of a flare, it's got a fairly linear profile to the feather. So you can see that's what that's going to look like. But I'm going to take that and lay that in there and take a couple of turns, and I'll actually use my turns of CDCs to bind that down further. You can do that as two separate steps, but okay. So that feather is bound in there nicely. And I'm just going to leave that CDC alone right now. When you're tying this in the smaller sizes, Chris ties this with 2 clumps of CDC in a split loop. One right now going on there, and then one is kind of the last step on the fly. In the smaller sizes, like on that size 14 I had, I kept the first set of CDC on this because it just disappeared. When you're tying a bigger one like this, it'll show up. And so I do the 2 different levels, and he does 2 different colors. Typically, he's got a yellow one on this underbody collar, if you will, and then he does a tan one on the outer loop. So I've got that in there, and now it's time to tie in a head on this. And so I'm going to go back over to my deer hair, cut off another hank of deer hair, and I'm going to preen out all the fluffy, fuzzy stuff from underneath it to where I get a good set of nice long hair. And I'm going to put that in my deer hair stacker. Give that a little stack, pull it out. I've got all those tips aligned. And you'll notice I've got the thread positioned about an eye length behind the eye of the thread. That's fairly important. If it's too far back into the body, your head is not going to go all the way towards the eye of the hook. If you're too close, your eye will almost disappear to the head. And so about an eye gape width back, I think, is about right. And I'm going to position this hair on there. And I'm going to give me, so I've got about half a body length going out forward. And I'm going to put some soft wraps on there. And then I'm going to begin to really cinch that down as I'm moving the body back. I'm going to carefully lift up all the butt ends of that, stick my scissors in, and just clip those off cleanly. Now I'm going to really crank down on that deer hair, and I'm actually spinning it around the eye of the hook. And what I'm hopefully doing is getting a 360 coverage of the deer hair on there. Now I'm going to start to use my fingers to begin to preen that back. And if I were doing this in the traditional way, I'd use my fingers and continually preen that back and eventually get it pulled back into a nice bullet head shape. And then I'd reach in with my thread and grab that and make a bullet head. I might have mentioned that I have a tool problem. I love these Renzetti bullet head tools. I think they're the slickest things since sliced bread. So I've got that ready to go. And you saw how much I was having to maneuver my fingers to try to get all those fibers tracked. This is it's a little aluminum disc with a latex rubber gasket in the center with a hole in it. And it comes with a set of 3. It's got a small, a medium, and a large. And unfortunately, I have used my medium so much that it's about the same size as the large. So it's not quite as effective, but it still works pretty well. So I'm going to position my thread back at the start of where the wing is tied in, and I'm going to take these and push this over it, push it down to about where I want it to tie in. And can you see, I'll turn that so you can see it, see how that flexed that latex rubber back, and it allows me to come in there and tie off that bullet head. And you can see it got some that were too short in there, and I'm just going to come in and nip those off. If you do a really good job of selecting your deer hair and positioning the length, you'll get almost 100% coverage on that, but probably doesn't matter that much to the fish. But you can see I've got a pretty nicely shaped bullet head on there. I've got, okay, I won't mess with that anymore. You can keep playing with that to try to make as nice a bullet head as you want, but the tool is really, really an advantage to you over doing all of that with your hand. And you can see I've got That's a little bit unruly. I'm going to go ahead and just dab on some Sally Hansen's at this point, because what the Sally Hansen's does kind of acts just like Brill cream, and it allows me to stroke all those fibers down and get a much smoother bullet head in there. All right, so now for legs. What I typically do when I'm tying on the legs, like I mentioned earlier, I'm using Uniflex in a yellow and a camel color, and I'll just spool out some links of that, and I'll show you how I tie them, and you may get a different view of how to do this later. But I simply take the 2 strands of Uniflex and use my fingers to tie an overhand knot in there, and I kind of scoot that down a ways. Now those are my legs, and I'm going to tie in the right hand side, kind of position that where I want it, and I'll go ahead and snip those off at the length I'm going to want later. I'm going to do some more trimming on this in a minute, but I've still got a nice length of those 2 sets of Uniflex, and I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to simply tie in an overhand knot, and now I've got the other set of legs. Chris spends a lot of time and actually ties an overhand knot and then a reverse overhand knot, such that when he gets the legs coming out the back, he gets them to where they splay out to either side. I found that you can do that same thing just by kind of manipulating. You put the fly, how you tie it in. In other words, the origin of how you tie it fly will affect what it looks like coming out the back end. Whoops, I'm not turning loose of that. And I'm trying to get these about the same length as the other side. If you don't get them exactly the same length, the fish will probably just think it's a cripple, so you're probably okay. Again, I'm going to bring those forward and clip those off. Now, I've got both a camel and a yellow going forward and back. I only want one of those on each one, so I'm going to clip off the yellow off the back legs. And this Uniflex is interesting. If you don't get tension on it, you can't cut it. And those are a little bit longer than I'd like, so I'm going to trim that a little bit to length. Try to trim that to the length over there. And now I left the camel colored long in the back, so I'm going to reverse that in the front. I'm going to clip off the camel on both sides. Now at this point, I've just got a couple of wraps on there, so I can start kind of playing with how those are oriented on there. You have to be a little careful because you've clipped the camel and you'll pull it back through, and then you've got a mess on your hands. But those look okay to me. And so I'm going to take a couple of wraps that are a little tighter on there, and then I'm going to go back and select some tan CDC, and this is the Trout Hunter brand. And again, it's very good because I'm looking for big bushy pieces of CDC on this, and so I'm going to just select a couple of nice long CDC. And I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to grab them by the tips, stroke all the barbs back, Do the same thing with the other feather. And again, you can do 2, 3, whatever you think it needs in there. These are pretty nice and bushy. I'm going to again take my hairline prepper, and while grabbing the tips and the butts, I'm going to stick those into the feather prepper so it bends all the barbs up, and I can come in with my Swiss CDC tool and yank those off of there. And if you get it a little close, don't have enough room to get the scissors in there, you can literally just reach in there with the tip of your scissors and pull that rachis up and give you enough room to get your scissors in there. Because again, what you want to do is very carefully cut as close to that rachis as you can, because what you're doing is releasing a line of those CDC barbs. And so I'm going to pull down on my, and if I were doing this by splitting the thread with a bodkin, I would really spend a lot of time flattening my thread out, making sure it was good and flat, and then opening it up. With this Schmayen tool, you don't really have to do anything. You just grab it and split it, and it just does a beautiful job of splitting it. Okay, so this is pretty tight in here. I'm going to have to be a little bit careful, and I wasn't careful enough. I released a bunch of it. For purposes of demonstration, I'm going to go ahead, but I lost a big batch of my CDC because it was a little short in there, but it'll be fine. I'll take and spin that up. And again, this really takes more than you think, spinning it up. And I've had people ask me, how do you know you've got too much spin on it? If the thread breaks, you spun it too much. And so that's spun up there, and I'm going to create a nice clump of CDC, and then I'm going to come in with my whip finish tool, try to get that right down into the same spot so I'm not creating a color band as much as possible. Pull that really good, and you can see it flared out the CDC some more. Release that, and then I'm going to turn the fly over. Make sure your legs are out of the way and everything, but I'm going to do a little cleanup here on the bottom to expose more of the body of this so that when it's floating in the water, you'll get a nice profile of the grasshopper in there. But that CDC just does an amazing job of making this look like a very, very buggy grasshopper.
That is a dynamite looking fly, Barry.
Yeah, it is just killer. And the legs, when you get that, it splats down on the water, and those legs kind of sit there and flex. It is a killer pattern. Now it will get waterlogged. Should very long, so you could put dry floating on it if you didn't want that to happen. Actually, what I find is it's very effective when it gets a little waterlogged, because the grasshoppers do the exact same thing. They get a little waterlogged, and it actually fishes just as good or better when it gets a little soggy. So I'll entertain any questions that anybody might have. And
Barry, could you do me a really big favor and show me how you use that thread separator tool? You were kind of off screen when you were showing that.
Yeah, I sure can. I'm just going to put a hook in here real quick. So there's my thread attached to it. Okay, and so there's the thread going down there. The Schmayen tool, I wish it's hard to see, but there's a little ridge on the end of that thing that goes all the way around. There are some other tools out on the market. There's a German guy that makes one that is a piece of tool steel that's sharpened, and then he's got a little barb on the end of it, and it works very effectively, but you have to position that barb very carefully. This is 360 degrees, and literally all I do is put that on there and pull it, and it splits that thread, and I just stick the nose back through, stick my finger in there, stick the Swiss CDC clamp in there, and grab the CDC.
That is slick.
It couldn't be any easier. So this is a Barry Ord Clark fly. It's from one of his featherbender books. And it's a really effective pattern, I think. Anytime you've got mayfly nymphs happening. So 2X, 3X streamer, olive thread. I'm going to use 70 denier regular thread. It's got an ostrich herl tail. It's got olive dubbing. The rib and gills are ostrich herl, and the wing case is, kind of your choice of synthetic material. I'm going to use a Fly Tires Dungeon material that I'll show you here in a second for it. And I typically tie this, it says just a 2XL, 3XL streamer. I really like the TMC 201s that have the curved shank on theirs. I think that makes a cool looking profile on things. So we're going to get started on there, and I'm just using flat wax 70D olive. Go ahead and get that started in there. And I'm going to start with a couple of pieces. And by the way, you can tie this in any color that you want to. The good news is the CDC that I'm going to use and the ostrich herl comes in just almost every color known to man on this thing. And so you can tie it in whatever color you want, trying to match what's going on in your local waters. I'm going to tie it in olive, which was what Barry Ord Clark did it originally. And you'll notice I've got two different peacock herls in here. Reason for that is I like a fairly small, fine-grained one for the tails, but I like a big, fluffy one for the rib and the legs and everything. So I'm going to start out with this more finer grained, and I'm going to come in and just select 3 pieces of herl. And I'm just trying to get 3 that are grouped together in there. And this is one of those things where you can be as anal retentive as you would like. I am not going to be, because you can come in there and take those 3 ostrich herl tails and you can tie them in individually, trying to get the perfect separation between all 3 of them and everything. To me, I grab them, try to make sure that the tips are about the same length. And I'm going to grab all 3 of those and tie them in, and tie them in about a hook shank in length. And you'll notice I didn't mess at all with where they were and everything, because once you get those tied on, you can come in here and pull those and preen them into position and create however perfect a tail you want to create. Now, you can spend as much time as you want tying those in, trying to make sure that they're picture perfect and everything. My supposition is when you dunk this thing in the water and start stripping it water, they're going to go wherever the heck they want to go. Ostrich herl is fairly flexible. And so I don't spend a whole heck of a lot of time on that. So I'm going to go back to my fuzzier ostrich herl now and pick one of those and pluck one off. I do like to kind of trim the end and get rid of the little curly cues. But I'm going to simply tie that in, and I'm going to tie that back to the exact same point that the 3 tail segments are tied in. Now I'm going to grab some dry fly dubbing, and you'll find out I use a lot of Fly Tire Dungeon stuff. This is their bullfrog dubbing, which is, I would call it a super fine like dubbing. The reason I like it better than superfine is it's really long. So I'm going to take some and strip it out of there. And I'm going to try to build a tapered body on this thing. And so it's going to take probably 3 layers of this dry fly dubbing. I suppose you could grab a giant hunk of it and tie it on there, and you could certainly do that. I find that I've got a lot better control of my dubbing if I'll tie it in reasonably sparse and then control that real well. And like I said, it's going to take me several layers of this to get the profile that I want. And again, I'm trying to build up a tapered, segmented, kind of torpedo shaped body on there, because that's the profile that the actual mayfly has. All right. So I've got a, nicely tapered body on there, and I'm going to take this ribbing ostrich herl and I'm going to begin to wrap that up the body. And what I'm doing is these are not adjacent touching, so they're adjacent spiral, but they've got a fairly tight separation on the spiral. And I'm just going to wrap that up through the body and get it all the way up to the head. And then I'm going to tie it off. All right, so I got that tied on there. Now I'm going to try to have this represent the abdomen and the legs, and there are no legs on top of this. So I'm going to simply take my scissors and come back in and give that a little haircut. Now, Barry Ord Clark, when he ties this, just goes on and finishes out the fly. I did that initially and found that this is a fairly fragile fly if you do that, because you get the little fish teeth in there, and all they have to do is break one of those wraps on the ostrich herl rib, and the whole thing comes undone. Now, we can debate, and I would give a lot of merit to the fact that when it comes apart, it actually works better as a fly. But I want to make durable flies, and so what I'm going to do is take some UV goo, and boy, this is a throwback. I found some clear cure goo, and I had a bottle of it, still had a lot of it in there. It's still liquid, still works fine. So I'm trying to use it up, but that's got to be 15 or 20 years old, but it still works fine. So I'm going to put it on my bodkin, and I'm just going to come in and lay down a layer of that right on top of that ostrich herl. Now, I don't want it on the bottom, so don't put so much on there where it bleeds around, because all of a sudden you'll have legs that are like Brillo pads on there. But put that in there, cure that off. And now I've got a pretty durable body on this thing because the UV has grabbed each one of those segments and locked it in so they can't come undone. All right, now I'm going to grab, and you could use Antron, you could use probably any synthetic material. I'm going to use some stuff from Fly Tires Dungeon. This is, find the package of it. This is Fly Tires Dungeon water mix. I think I actually spelled out a different color. You can use any color in there on this. And so it's just a nice synthetic material. I like this because it's got a nice color to it. And so I'm going to bump that down, pull that back into where the is inside the hook shank, and bind that down going forward. Go ahead and clip off the fuzzies off of that, because if you don't get rid of them now, they get harder later on. Okay. And so I've got that stuck in there. I'm just going to put it back in my material clip. And now I'm going to grab a set of peacock herl. And I saw somebody in the chat ask a question, what about using, for the body segment on this, using peacock herl and wire to get it in? You can certainly do that, and that would create a similar effect. The ostrich herl, I think, is a little more flexible than the peacock herl is, and it's certainly longer fibered, and so it wouldn't give quite the same effect with all the legs on here. I think it'd be a tighter body. And you can compare real quickly here, because I'm going to create a thorax segment out of peacock, and we're going to wrap it around there. And so you can judge for yourself the difference in the way that that looks. Could you do it with wire and peacock? Sure. But it'd be a different fly. So I have those in there now. I'm going to bring my thread back to that tie-in point. And now we're going to do a little trick that you've seen before. I'm going to grab, and I think this is yet another, this is a Pettigene CDC. You can tell I get my CDC from all over the place. This is matched. The color on this CDC is the same as what the rest of the body of the fly is. And you could change this up. You could make the segments here a different color, but I'm going to go back to my feather prepper again. Once again, I'm taking the CDC feathers, stroking all the barbs back, and just dropped one. Grabbing the tips on there, and I'm going to grab tips in both ends and press that down into my feather prepper such that I've got a segment of CDC fibers on there. Same thing. I've grabbed those, and you notice a little smarter this time. I got a little more distance in there, so hopefully I don't lose half of my CDC when I go to put it in the split loop. But I'm simply reaching in there with my scissors and cutting between the rachis. And if I do have it a little short in there, which that's a little short based on what I did a minute ago, I actually can release the pressure on that Swiss CDC clamp and just push it up a little bit. Okay, so now we're back to the thread. The thread that I was splitting on the Mimic hopper was a 240D, so pretty easy to split. This is a 70 denier flat waxed Danville, so it's a thinner thread. And you'll notice I didn't do any of the mechanics of flattening out. I'm just grabbing that and pulling it back, and it splits the thread very nice. Not only did it split the thread, it broke the thread. Let's try that again. And it probably would make sense to unwind the thread a little bit. I'm probably pushing the envelope by not letting that flatten out.
What thread did you say you're using?
This is 70 denier Danville flat wax olive.
That should split fairly easily.
It does. Okay. So I have that in there. Take my Swiss CDC clamp. Grab that. And spin it up. And I'm just holding that up with my whip finish tool and letting it go to town. And you can tell when this is wound up, because when you're looking at it there, if you'll notice, it's a little hard to see, it's still all in a line, and the thread has not really bitten into the CDC line of fibers. Now they're starting to wind up a little bit. You can see the rotation on those and see how that is curling up. You want to keep going until that is really, really well curled up, because at that point, that is really grabbed in there. You can't pull that out. And so I'm going to go ahead and tie those in. I'm doing open spiral wraps through the ostrich hurl there. I'm going to use my fingers and kind of preen that back and down. And I'm going to bring my synthetic material up over that while I'm preening all those CDC fibers down and back. Pop that back, and I'm well away from the hook eye, because if you get too close to the hook eye on this, you can really block off the hook eye with these fibers. It's pretty easy to come in and cause a mess. All right, so I'll just do a little cleanup on that. And a nice clean thread head in there. And again, I'm using my fingers to kind of preen that material down. I'm going to go ahead and put a whip finish on that. Clip my thread off there. And this is a little longer and scragglier than what I would like. So I'm going to come in with my fingers and preen that off a little. Just clip them. Now, again, you could quit right there. I like to go in and lay a bead of UV over the top of that synthetic material, and then complete my thread head. It kind of darkens the head down a little bit, and I'll give it just a little touch on the thread wraps, both above and below. And grab my UV gun, zap that. And there is the completed Barry Ord Clark Burrowing Mayfly.
Another beautiful pattern, Barry. We actually had started out to have a 2-for-1, and then a gentleman that I thought was going to be on last week joined us tonight, and so it's going to be a 3-for-1. But what do we mean by that? Well, let's just take a look over here at the materials area, and these are some of the things that we'll be working with tonight, tools and so forth. But what I would like to start out with is a look at a comparison. Now there is a hopper leg tied on a peacock. So what does a safety pin and a peacock leg have to do with each other? Well, quite frankly, you're going to have to wait for a little bit to find out about that.
Peacock or pheasant tail, Al?
Pheasant. If I said peacock, I'm sorry. Anyway, that's not a pheasant tail, but this particular thing that we're going to talk about, when I get to it, will be on just knotted legs. It could be anything. But anyway, before we get to that, let's go back over here. Because last week I had planned on starting the weekly tip out with these 2 feathers. Now some of you won't have a clue what I'm talking about, but there's a fellow on the call tonight by the name of Jim Ferguson who may have a very good idea. And let me get back over here to the vise for a moment, and I'm going to temporarily remove this knotted leg and hold up these 2 feathers. Because on a weekly tip, about a year and a half ago, we straightened out some feathers by using a heat gun or a hair dryer. And there's a crooked feather of a golden pheasant tippet. And I have another one that was almost identical to it that we straightened out.
Golden pheasant crest.
Crest. I'm sorry, Jim. Thank you for straightening me out for a golden pheasant crest. And there's one right there that we straightened out with that same heat gun. Looked almost identical to the one I just showed you. And I said at the time to Jim, well, let's see how long that takes for it to go back to its original shape. Well, now we're going into our 3rd year, and it hasn't happened yet. So maybe it's been fixed. At least 3 years seems like or a couple of years going into another one seems like a pretty good success rate. Anyway, let's get back over here though to one of the tips that I really wanted to talk about. And I'll just slip this back up here while I talk about it. One of the things that I've made a discovery on, nothing to do with this leg right now, but I watch a lot of YouTube fly tying videos, and I turn the audio off on all of them. And why is that? Because you will be surprised at the cute little twists and turns that people make with their fingers that you will not pick up on when you're listening to the voice. And I'll go back then and listen to it with the voice on it, and to learn just what's going on. I can usually figure it out. I've had enough flies to be able to figure out what's going on. But some of the cute little things that people do with their fingers could have a lot of value and add to your own personal tying. So that's just a tip. Don't be afraid to watch a YouTube video with no audio. Now, no audio got me to where we are tonight. I've been struggling for the last about 5 years, with my hands getting worse and worse at being able to pick up things, not putting a knot in pheasant tail barbs for legs and all that kind of stuff. I've just been having a fit of a time. Well, I usually pre-put the hooks into clips so I can easily pick them up when I'm going to put them in a vise, and a few other things that I do for myself in advance. But one of the things that I've had a real problem with is tying legs like this. And in fact, up until recently, I used a device like this. And it worked pretty good, but my fingers are getting enough of a problem that I was even having trouble with this tool. Well, there's another tool here. I'll bring it up. And it's a closed nose tweezer that you press it to keep it open and then let go of it. It closes, and that works pretty good too, but it'll sometimes damage the feather because there's a pretty strong clamp there. And then the other day, while watching no audio fly tying videos, I saw this weird thing. A guy started out just like this. Didn't have this up here. He started out just like this. I said, that's interesting. What's he doing with a safety pin? Well, then he holds up something that looks like this. I said, boy, where are we going now? Well, where he was going is that he had constructed a tool for knotting legs. So let me turn this just a little bit so we get it more in the middle. There we go. And I am going to knot a leg with this little device. Now let me reach over here at the materials area, and I'll grab this piece of pheasant tail that I've got here and bring it over to the vise. And I'm going to just pull a few of these barbs out here. Whoops, I just dropped it. Thankfully, it's big enough that it isn't going to go very far. And I'll just take these out here. Now, what I'm going to do is just grab those barbs by the tip and hold them here in front. I'm going to bring this tool around like that over the top of the ones that are the original. You see that? Okay, and now let me come up here like this. Slip it up in here, slide this off. And there you've got your knotted leg. Now all you have to do is straighten it out.
Totally blown my mind.
Well, it did me too, and I wasn't hearing any audio. So, guys, I wasn't hearing any audio. I said, I got to hear what this guy's got to say. Well, the fellow was Matthias Kiriasi. And I'm murdering that name. I just got to be. I mean, I'm looking at it. But anyway, let's just say it's Matthias. And, well, the name didn't sound like an American name. So when I turned on the audio, all he had was music. So that was kind of a key indicator that maybe he didn't speak English very well or didn't speak it at all. Didn't make any difference. So I wouldn't have had any audio in the first place. But anyway, we're going to go back and do this again. I'll pull off another couple of barbs and we'll just slip up here. And this all looks pretty cool, but you can have problems. Come around, up and over, down and through, and the knot's tight. Except I was dinking around there, and I lost one of the barbs. Anyway, I could trim that out, but you kind of get the idea. I'm going to give you a heads up, though. You don't just take and cut this thing off and come up with the tool you see there in the vise. This is the third tool that I made. Let's take a look at number one. I had this grand plan. I said, well, that looks pretty much like it. Well, I can tell you right now, it just makes a gob of a mess. That's all it does. So do not make the loop too short, the pointed loop too short, or the right-handed sidebar too short. So I went the other direction. I said, well, I'll fix that. And I made the loop, pointed loop on the left, longer, and I was made darn sure that the right side was longer. Well, that was almost as bad as the one where it was too short. So here's your another tip, just a free bonus tip. You want it to have proportions about like this. And what I've done with mine is to hold these up so I can get them up I get them into my fingers, is I'm just putting them in clips. Well, on this one, I mounted it in a hackle pliers and wrapped some thread on it and put a couple of drops of UV on it, just so I made a tool out of the darn thing. It can be mounted in the vise, but it can also be handheld and used in place rather than having to use a vise. So anyway, that's tonight's tip.
That's
Any
great.
questions?
That's a great tip, Al. That's amazing. Thank you. Tying
Good.
legs, tying knots in peacock, in pheasant. Now you got me saying it. In pheasant tail has been a bane of mine for a long time.
Well, that will help. At least it did me. For a long time, I just tied them with my fingers, and that just doesn't happen anymore. So there are those other tools that will work. Quite frankly, a crochet needle works pretty good too, and I used one of those at one time. But anyhow, this is kind of helped me out a little bit. I'll be doing a few more knotted legs. And anyway, any other questions or comments or whatever?
And Al, that should work for tying rubber legs like I was tonight. Just
Absolutely. In fact, I've got a set of legs here that, where did I do? Oh, here they are. Let me just go back here to the vise. And here's just some fly line backing that I tied a set of legs out of.
Oh, yeah.
And it's for another program that I'm going to do on right and left knotted legs. And it's a good way that I can show a right and a left knotted leg, and we can talk about what that does to the balance of the fly and all that stuff. Not for this program tonight, but anyhow, there's that.
You could probably figure out by reversing the sequence that you do on that to tie right hand and left hand knots with it.
Barry, you were just exactly where I was. That one that I just held up for you, that's what all you do is just take and flip this guy over right here. You hold him like that for the right-handed knot, and like that for the left-handed knot.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So you can easily tie right and left-handed knots, no problem. And we'll talk. Well, that's for another program that I'll do when we're balancing flies with the proper knots and other stuff. But anyhow, any questions?
I may never tie another overhand knot with my fingers again.
Good. I hope it works out for you. And please understand, this is from Matthias DiBiase, and I found probably 3-4 other people out there that are doing something almost identical. I mean, so I didn't invent anything. I just happened to run across something in my no audio cruising, I call it. Anyway,
so I mentioned that Chris spends a lot of time tying a right hand and a left hand knot. He does it with his fingers, but with that, and I sit there and watch him do that, and I wound up with 2 rights or 2 lefts every time, and with that, it's foolproof.
You are dead on, man. Absolutely. Okay, we're going to move into the sharing on BTs, and as we've always done so far this year, and we'll continue at least for the near term on sharing. The first thing we're going to share comes from me, and we're again talking about the mystery spinner fly project is what we're calling it, and we're involving all of you to help us out. Well, that's the fly right there. It was tied by a gentleman by the name of James Lund in Sweden. I just recently sent Instagram message or whatever those darn things are. I'm not real good at that kind of crap. But I sent him that and it did not get an answer back. Anyhow, there's his fly. And from Arkansas, Susan Parsons sent me her mystery flies. And by golly, Susan, you're about to nail it. Looking really good. So
well, I obsessed with it.
You should have seen some of the emails that I got from Susan. We're going to we'll bring her up later when we're discussing other things in the sharing. But she got pretty frustrated a couple of times, and finally she said, "Oh darn, a little bit worse than that. I'm going to bed." So you know, the tide so far one of the better examples of the mystery spinner fly. So good job, young lady.
Well, thank you. That's high praise coming from you. That's for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. Any questions for her before we go on, folks? Okay, great. Then we will go back, and does anyone out there have something they'd like to share with us?
Hey, Al, are they using elk or deer for that mystery fly?
The one from James Lenn looks like deer hair to me. It looks to me like whitetail. But again, if he's in Europe or in Sweden, maybe it's their version of something like that. I don't know. I don't know what they got for critters over there.
I used deer hair, and then I used roe deer hair. I think the one you showed there, Al, that was roe deer, but I think the last one I sent you a picture of that was green, I think that was like a coastal deer hair.
Sure.
I've tried different ones, and that's been part of my frustration.
Okay. Anybody else have something they want to share?
Al, that's a very nice fly for larger mayflies as a spent spinner.
Mm-hmm.
You could do all sorts of flies with that recipe. That's a very nice tie.
It's a nice tie, and I'm getting pretty good at tying the spinner type. I'm trying to figure out how to stand divided wings up looking shaped like that. And I haven't got there yet, but I'll give it a try.
Al, I've
Anyway.
got something real quick. This
Yes.
is John.
John,
I just put a link to a page on my website. It's a link is for free old fly fishing and fly tying books. They're downloadable. And the first one I have on there is from the 1740s, I think it was.
Oh my
and
goodness.
I have them all the way up to 1944. So these have gone off of copyright, and whenever I find one, I just update the page. So you had mentioned, or somebody had mentioned the other day on one of the previous meetings we had of a book that you could download, and I added that to the site as well. But there's probably 75 to 90 books, links that are out there.
That is a major contribution to folks in the fly tying, fly fishing industry. That's it for tonight, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. For now, it's a wrap. Until next time, see ya.